Hey guys, Blaze Game here, back another YouTube video, and today we've got some awesome fight news to talk about. So the first bit of news that I want to talk about is Jake Paul potentially fighting UFC champion Kamaru Usman. And I think this would be a really cool fight, a really good fight for Jake Paul. You know, if he can go in there and if he can knock out or beat a UFC champion, I think this would be great for his resume, great for his legacy. You know, really prove how good of a boxer he is. Obviously, I know Kamaru Usman is no boxer, but he's just coming off 2 back-to-back knockouts over really elite level MMA fighters. I think it would be a really smart fight for Usman, as Jake Paul said in his tweet. You know, these guys have been beefing back and forth. As Jake Paul said, this would be Kamaru Usman's biggest payday, so I think it would be silly of Kamaru Usman not to take that fight, knowing the amount of money he would make. Whether the UFC would allow that fight to happen, I don't know. They probably wouldn't, just because at the end of the day, if Kamaru Usman does lose to Jake Paul, then the amount of memes that will be made to Kamaru Usman would sort of ruin Kamaru Usman's brand a little bit. But I think the UFC would be silly not to at least invest in Jake Paul and talk with him and make other future fights, maybe the Nate Diaz fight in future. I think the UFC really should invest in him, guys. I think if you look at the attention that he brought to the Usman versus Masvidal 2 fight, you know, there were moments when fights were going on and knockouts were happening and the whole crowd was focused on shouting "fuck Jake Paul." You know, at one point you had Daniel Cormier going over there and confronting him. So I think the UFC really should invest in Jake Paul. I think he could make them a lot of money. I think he could bring a lot of attention to their sport. I think, you know, these cross-promotion events between boxing and MMA, I think more of these events really need to happen. I think it's great for both sports. I think they both benefit, because you've got sort of 2 fan bases going at it, and then you've also got the boxing MMA fans. So you've kind of got, you know, 3 different audiences that can enjoy the fights, but there's also a bit of rivalry there. So I think it would be silly, as I say, for the UFC not to invest in Jake Paul. But moving on to the next fight, we have Chase Hooper versus Steven Peterson. Now, the reason I really want to talk about this fight is because I've got some words to say on the way the UFC have sort of approached Chase Hooper. I'm not really a huge fan of the way the UFC have approached Chase Hooper's fight. If you look at his first fight, Daniel Timo, even though he got the win, he got a finish in his first UFC fight. I believe at that time he was 20 years old. So, you know, to be 20 years old and get a finish over, you know, someone who was, you know, probably double his age, double the amount of experience, was a great win for him. But I just think his last 2 fights, he's absorbed way more strikes than he has given. And I think if you look at it, you know, the Alex Caceres fight was one of the worst UFC fights I've ever seen, and that's not bad mouth in UFC. Obviously I love UFC, but if you look at that fight, Alex Caceres was not intimidated by Chase Hooper. He was never in any danger, and he knew it. If you look at the commentary, even Joe Rogan was saying this was a bad fight. This was hard to watch just because Chase Hooper really didn't have any advantage, had no chance of winning that fight. I just think it was a bit of an unfair fight. You know, Alex Caceres had more than quadruple the amount of experience. You know, his Chase Hooper's last fight against Peter Barrett, he got the win, which is a beautiful Himinari roll submission, sort of got him in an ankle pick. But prior to that submission, he was sort of getting busted up and beaten up the entire fight. As I say, the kid's absorbing a lot of punches, a lot of damage, and I think if the UFC aren't careful, I think Chase Hooper could seriously get really hurt or potentially even knocked out. I think if you look at Steven Peterson, I think stylistically this is a good fight for Chase Hooper, because, you know, Steven Peterson has more submissions than he does knockouts. So hopefully this will be a good grappling match. I think it would be good for Chase Hooper to get an opponent that will be willing to go to the ground with him, even though he is a black belt. I just think the UFC should match him up with someone who's more, you know, his style, more of a jiu-jitsu fighter. I think then we could really see the full potential of Chase Hooper. You know, as he shown in previous fights, he has got great jiu-jitsu, and when he is on the ground, he really does look, you know, like he knows what he's doing. He is definitely a great grappler. And, you know, if you look at his training, what he's been doing recently, he's been doing all the right things by training with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, and just even having that experience with him. You know, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is one of the best strikers in MMA history, so just having that is definitely going to elevate Chase Hooper's skills. I just think physically he's always going to have a bit of a disadvantage with his opponents, you know, because he is so young. So I do think there's always going to be a 10-year a physicality difference in his opponents, which is why I think the UFC should match him up with someone who is closer to his age. You know, one of the best made UFC fights I've ever seen is Corey McKenna versus Kay Hansen. You know, if you look at that fight, both similar in age, both similar in experience, and, you know, the way the fight played out was incredible. A great display of their own games. You know, great striking, great grappling. Corey McKenna got a victory. It was a great win from Corey McKenna. I just wish the UFC would give the same treatment to Chase Hooper. You know, if you look at another fight that they've just announced in the women's division, Miranda Maverick versus Macy Barber, you know, very similar in age, very similar in potential. You know, they've both have got potential to be sort of the next generation of, you know, UFC female fighters. So I think, as I say, if the UFC can just sort of cater towards Chase Hooper and give him a bit more advantage in his fights, I think it would really help Chase Hooper. I think he wouldn't absorb as much punishment. I think it'd be a very good idea for the UFC just to sort of match Chase Hooper up a bit better. But the next piece of news that I want to talk about is the announcement of Israel Adesanya versus Marvin Vettori 2. Now, this is a great fight for Israel Adesanya to return to the middleweight division to. You know, Marvin Vettori in his last fight against Kevin Holland showed a lot of grappling. He showed some striking, but it was mainly just him sort of taking Kevin Holland down the entire time. You know, the reason why I think this is a good fight for Israel Adesanya to return to, because I think either he's going to prove to everyone that he has got good grappling, he's got good you know, jiu-jitsu, but you know, perhaps Blachowicz did have a really big size advantage over Adesanya. You know, on that fight, Jan Blachowicz must have had at least 30 pounds over Adesanya. So I think, as I say, if Adesanya can come into this fight, prove that he's still the king of the middleweight division, which I believe he is. You know, I think Israel Adesanya is still one of the best strikers in the UFC, still one of the best middleweights of all time. So even though he's coming off a loss to Jan Blachowicz, it doesn't affect his middleweight legacy at all. You know, Marvin Vettori has been on a tear. He's been on a 6-fight winning streak. You know, it's a shame that it's not Robert Whittaker fighting Adesanya. But I think it's a blessing, because Adesanya will definitely knock Vettori out, and then they can do the Whittaker rematch in Australia or New Zealand in a sold-out crowd. So I think it is a blessing in disguise for Israel Adesanya. You know, a good chance for Marvin Vettori to potentially become the first Italian UFC champion. You know, the event will take place June 12th, and co-maining that title fight will be Davison Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno 2. So already two incredible title fights that have been announced for that card, so I can't wait for the return of Israel Adesanya. But moving on to the next piece of news is some unfortunate news. Corey Sandhagen versus TJ Dillashaw has recently been called off. TJ Dillashaw has sustained an injury while drilling, as he said on his Instagram post. It's like a massive gash towards his eye. It looks pretty gruesome. It's like blood and flesh sticking out, so it's a pretty gruesome injury. You know, it is a massive shame for this fight to be called off. I was really looking forward to this fight. You know, you look at the fight, you had two knockout artists going at it. I think this would have been a great fight for Corey Sandhagen to solidify that he is still, he is one of the best bantamweights in the division, right now, which I believe he is. You know, that would have further pushed his sort of title contention. You know, TJ Dillashaw coming off a 2-year layoff. You know, he is a bit of a steroid cheat, but you know, this would have been a great return fight for TJ Dillashaw to get a win over a young, hungry savage in the bantamweight division, and further prove that he is one of the best bantamweights. I do think that is sort of tarnished a bit because of the EPO that he's done, which as I say, I do think it affects his sort of fighting charisma and his credibility. But as I say, I think it is a shame that it's been called off, but it will be replaced with Michelle Waterson versus Marina Rodriguez. Michelle Waterson just coming off a win over Angela Hill, which was a great performance. That was a great fight. Marina Rodriguez coming off a beautiful performance over Amanda Hebas, who the UFC was really pushing. She had a lot of hype. You know, previous to that, Amanda Hebas, I believe, was 10-1. So, you know, great fight. You know, in the female division, my bad guys. I really do look forward to that fight. Definitely look forward to a breakdown and prediction video for that entire card. But the next piece of news that I need to talk about is Kevin Holland calling out Donald Cowboy Cerrone down. This was definitely unexpected when I checked my Instagram this morning. I didn't expect to see Kevin Holland calling out Donald Cerrone for a catchweight. Now, the reason why he's calling out Donald Cerrone is because Diego Sanchez has had to withdraw from the fight. There has been no reasons why it's not been said, whether it is injury, whether it is something personal. All the best to Diego Sanchez. Hopefully he can get back in the octagon real soon. But I think this is a really exciting fight for Kevin Holland. It's not really a fight that means anything because it's at a catchweight. Do I think the UFC will make it? I think they should. I think if they can make that the main event, how about that? Kevin Holland versus Donald Cerrone, 5 rounds. That would be a crazy fight to make. I'd love to see that fight. Let me know in the comment section what you guys think of that fight. as I said, I think Donald Cerrone should take that fight. If he can go in there, he can get a win over Kevin Holland, who's very popular, very charismatic, very memorable. If you look at any fight that gets pulled out, or any fight that gets called off, you look at the Instagram comments or the social media comments, everyone's immediately like, right, cool, big mouth. So he's already a meme in a sense where everyone knows who to call if anything goes wrong in a fight. As I say, great fight for Donald Cerrone to potentially get back on our winning ways. Hopefully the fight does get made. But the last piece of news that I want to talk about is Francis Ngannou versus John Jones. Now, there's been many opponents for Francis Ngannou. I know the UFC want to make Francis Ngannou versus Derek Lewis. I don't necessarily want to see that fight. Derek Lewis definitely deserves a title shot, but if you look at the first fight, it's very lackluster, one of the most boring fights in UFC history, and who's to say that's not going to happen again? If anything, they're both sort of in a situation where, Ngannou's champion, so he's got everything to lose. Derek Lewis, he's coming on, I believe, a 4-fight win streak, so he's got a lot to lose too. He's sort of risking his win streak and maybe his final title run in the UFC. So I don't think it's a fight that should be made just because the first fight is still fresh in people's mind. I still remember that fight being very boring. But as for Francis Ngannou versus John Jones, this fight needs to happen. I think this is such a great fight for John Jones to prove that he is still one of the greatest martial artists of all time, if not the greatest mixed martial arts fighter of all time. This will further prove, further cement his legacy. If he can go in there and he can beat Francis Ngannou, who's an absolute savage, I think this will be great for John Jones' legacy. You've also had Tyson Fury calling out Francis Ngannou, which is ridiculous. Whether he wants him in a boxing match or an MMA fight, if it's MMA, Tyson Fury will get absolutely spanked by Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou will murk him. I believe any top 10 a heavyweight would spank Tyson Fury. I think he'd get dominated by probably even a top 15. But if they do make it in boxing, I'd like to see it in boxing. I think obviously I would favour Tyson Fury, definitely. I haven't really seen too much footage of him boxing, but if you watch the Steve Cunningham versus Frank Mir fight, now I know it's a bit of a silly fight to sort of reference to this fight, but if you just sort of watch that fight, really, to me that really did showcase MMA striking, and then boxing, there's way more footwork and way more sort of movement and angles involved in boxing. MMA is a bit scrappier, but all the potential opponents that Francis Ngannou could face, whether it is a Tyson Fury, John Jones, Lewis, I think these are all very exciting fights for him. I'm interested to know what you guys think. Who do you guys think Francis Ngannou should fight next? I know obviously the UFC are pushing for Ngannou versus Lewis in August. I think Francis Ngannou should wait for John Jones. But let me know in the comment section down below who you think Francis Ngannou should fight next. Now the last piece of news I have to talk about real quick, because it was it's just been announced not too long ago, but Logan Paul versus Floyd Mayweather has recently been announced. Now, I know this is a bit of a silly fight to be made. I know maybe you guys aren't a big fan of this fight, but I think I have to talk about it just because I'm a big fan of Logan Paul. I think this is a really funny fight. I don't think it's necessarily best for the sport of boxing because it doesn't really bring too much credibility. I've got Logan Paul, who's really he's 0-2. He's lost to KSI twice. You've got Floyd Mayweather, who's an undefeated boxer. It's kind of ridiculous. Logan Paul is at least over 200 pounds. Floyd Mayweather, he's probably in UFC terms, I think he's a featherweight. So I think size-wise, it's silly, but I'm very excited for the fight. Very intrigued what the card will look like. I know even Jordan Belfort, from Wolf of Wall Street, he was asking to get a boxing fight on the card. So it'll be interesting just to see the event, how it plays out. I know it's going to take place June 6th, I believe. So yeah, great fight that I look forward to. As I say, I would be interested to know in the comment section down below what you guys think of Logan Paul versus Floyd Mayweather. But I hope you guys really enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe. Stay tuned for a Dominic Reyes versus Yuri Prochazka breakdown and reaction video. And I hope you guys have a great day. Peace.